Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast. This is our episode 4. I'm Jay, your host from Orlando, Florida, and Derek.
I'm Derek, coming to you from Melbourne, Florida.
Cool. So last time we talked about the 3 VTs, and those 3 VTs, Derek, you want to remind them what they were?
Oh my gosh, I can't remember off the top of my head. Why did you put me on the spot like this?
It's only been a week.
All right, EVT, PVT, and DVT. And don't forget your POC and your PRD.
Yes. So if you didn't see that video, go back and watch that. It's definitely, it's very technical, and it's definitely going to be very useful if you're designing a product. This week, we're going to talk about manufacturing. Derek, what are we talking about?
We're talking about manufacturing. We have a lot of experience manufacturing. Most of our manufacturing is overseas based on high demand from customers. But yeah, we're talking about manufacturing this week.
So I've broken it down to 4 things, and I may miss stuff, but that's good enough. Circuit board manufacturing, plastic injection molding, packaging, and assembly. So I think what we could do is just go through the different items, talk about how they're done in the different places, if we have done them before, and, pros and cons to everything, and, hopefully share our knowledge in manufacturing. So the first thing we'll talk about is circuit board assembly. So we have experience with circuit board assembly in China and in Florida in America. Derek, what are some of the pros and cons you can think of about manufacturing in China?
So manufacturing in China, talking about circuit boards. Sometimes we talk about smart stuff, and then we talk about kind of the dumb stuff. And when you're getting ready to send a circuit board over to China, you always want to keep in mind in the back of your head that, somebody, just hear me out, somebody could potentially copy it. But chances are they're not going to copy your product unless you're making millions of products. And if you're making millions of products, you probably already have patent protection, trademark protection, copyright protection anyways. But when you're manufacturing in China, you're manufacturing your smart stuff in China, you have to send over your firmware, you have to send over your test instructions, your programming instructions. You essentially have to send over everything, including your schematics and your Gerber files for your circuit boards. So, you're basically relinquishing everything to China at that point. And that's your smart stuff. And if there's some sort of special sauce in there, just the challenge is you have to trust, and then you have to check that a little bit later. But when you're working with us, for example, we have kind of checks and balances on how we're able to do that, and what we can do, and what our limitations are there too.
Mm-hmm. So definitely a big con getting copied. But I think the reality is if you're going to get copied, there's really not much you can do to get copied. Like, people will buy your stuff, they'll reverse engineer it, they'll figure out how to copy you. So what are some of the pros of working in China for PCB assembly?
Okay, so circuit board assembly, I kind of explained working in China. And by the way, don't forget, we do a lot of work in Vietnam too, but working in China, the supply chain and logistics is phenomenal. So we've all heard of the New York Minute. There's something that we call the Shenzhen Speed. And in Shenzhen, if you don't know, is basically the manufacturing capital, maybe for high electronics and electronic stuff in China. So Shenzhen is the city that you should be manufacturing. If you're talking to somebody and they're telling you that they're in Hong Kong or Taiwan, you can do manufacturing there. Not saying that you can't, but most likely you're talking to someone in Shenzhen manufacturing your circuit boards, number one. And I guess I kind of went off my subject there. Can you push me back on where I should be going there? Whoa. I'm so excited to talk about everything. So many different places.
So the pros are speed, cost, and there is definitely the place to manufacture circuit boards, right? You can get, everything comes from China when it comes to electronics, like between China, Taiwan, and that area,
yeah.
Anything you want to do electronics, definitely. Now, one of the cons, I would say, the big one that we were affected by is counterfeit parts, right? So we have, you think you're buying the right thing, and then you end up building 100 pieces or 1,000 pieces, and then the IC fails on you. And I know the big popular one, and I'm talking a really old one, is an FTDI chips. That's a big one. So definitely counterfeit. Did we talk about price?
So one thing we do to prevent the counterfeit, and then we'll talk about price, is we actually have laboratories that we will send a couple of the chips to be tested. So we'll decap those, we'll do testing, make sure that they're authentic. So next thing is price. You want to talk about the price?
Well, it's cheap, right?
More or less, if you have the infrastructure and you know what you're doing, it is cheap. And that is a huge takeaway that obviously it's no surprise to the world because China is manufacturing for the world. But you have to really know what you're doing. Otherwise, it might not be cheap.
Got it. So then let's talk about USA manufacturing. Obviously, we're in Melbourne, Florida. There's a ton of SMT manufacturing there, including us. What are some of the pros and cons? Well, I think it's exactly the opposite of China. Number one, we're not going to steal your product, so don't be afraid to share your files. And if you are afraid, we have an NDA. You can sign in and share your files. Two is speed, and we're not the fastest. And definitely, I've noticed that production in Florida is not as fast as China. No matter who you go to, we have to wait for the circuit boards. We have to wait for the parts to show up. So it definitely takes a lot longer. Derek, what else? What else am I missing?
I think one of the big takeaways there is the logistics. We don't manufacture the resistors, capacitors, microcontrollers, diodes. They get manufactured all over the world. And that big supply chain happens to be overseas for the majority of the things that we're sourcing.
Right. And one of the big ones, actually, I forgot, is partnering with a distribution network such as, Arrow or DigiKey, Mauser. Well, those guys, not so much, but there are people who help you get those parts and stock them and supply them. And if you start working with them early, like when you're working on your EVT, then they'll be with you, throughout the entire journey. And that's their job. That's what they want. They want to make sure that they're the ones supplying you the parts. So that's one of the advantages of working in the US. Maybe also in China, if you're big enough, you can figure out how to navigate that. But when we work with the product in Florida, we generally partner up with one of those guys, and they help us make sure that we can get the parts. And so that's definitely a plus.
One thing about working in China, Jay, you remember Huashangbei? Huashangbei is a huge kind of market in China where you can buy components. And I actually saw a story on the news recently that Huashangbei is shut down right now due to COVID restrictions. And, we're August. What is today? August? Well, September now. But the point is, we're in September 2022, and they're still, going through COVID. They're being very strict about it and trying to take and do things right. But that's actually really difficult when it comes to sourcing and logistics, closing down Huashangbei. And for anybody who doesn't know, Huashangbei is this huge, we're talking 12 floors market with all kinds of electronic components, and being shut down in I think it's in the Fujian district, not Shenzhen, but in a slightly different area. That's pretty big.
Do you have some videos of us walking around that we could probably loop in?
I think we could probably loop some of those in. You might see that I'm a little quirky, or our footage is really bad, or I think I had a different hairstyle at the time.
That's okay. Saying. They're not going to judge you. Don't worry about it. So the next thing is I didn't say Mexico, but I know Mexico is a big one, and we haven't really done a lot in Mexico or Vietnam. So I'm going to skip those for circuit board assembly, and we'll jump into plastic injection molding. Again, Derek, China, plastic injection molding. What do you think?
I would say yes. If you're going to do injection molding, China, making the injection mold tooling is basically where everything's being made. We actually you and I owned a company in India, and we were looking to start manufacturing and doing injection molding in India. And I guess the consensus we found was everybody was manufacturing their molds in China. They're able to source the materials. They're able to CNC machine the injection mold tooling much faster, more rapid, and they have really high precision. Even the big companies, I'm talking the big car companies, they're manufacturing in China, and then they're shipping them to Mexico, where those molds are then put into an injection molding press. So the answer is, definitely a big pro for China injection molding.
Are there any cons of working in China for injection molding?
There are some cons. If you don't know what you don't know, that's what's going to bite you. And so be aware, if you haven't done injection molding, just because you're making 3 different parts it doesn't mean you have to make 3 different injection molds. You can sometimes, put those different components into one injection mold and make a family and pay for one injection mold. So there are a lot of different tips and tricks that you can do. There's a big mold base. You can take out a mold core and put a new mold core in, and then you basically have one injection molding base, that you pay for one mold, but yet you have the ability to kind of get multiple parts out of it. It doesn't always work, across the board, apples and oranges. Sometimes you have to kind of plan that out. But, we're able to do a lot of those tricks in China. And when you're doing manufacturing in China on injection molds, you have to keep in mind, this is set up. China is set up for mass production. And when you come in there and you're trying to manufacture just a couple of parts, it makes it really difficult.
Mm-hmm. What about pricing? Is it comparable to making in the US or Vietnam? Like, which one would you prefer if you're...
I genuinely prefer working in China. I think that the prices are competitive. I remember once upon a time, before we owned our own office in China, I was working with a guy, and he took my injection mold from the company he was working at. He physically took it to his new company that he just started, and I flew to China, and I said, dude, where is your factory? And, he took me to lunch at McDonald's, and then he was taking me to his factory, which was like a garage. And I'm like, this is not what I signed up for. So you really have to be aware of who you're doing business with. Just because they tell you one thing and show you pictures, it doesn't mean that's actually what you're signing up for. So they can show you one hand and then slip it out and show you something else. So it's not always straightforward there.
And of course, like the big thing that we're not talking about is shipping and tariffs, that new tariff thing that happened in 2018 or whatever. Are there tariffs on plastic stuff?
There are tariffs on plastics, and it really just depends on what your harmonization code is. That's the HS code. And there is an HS code lookup. If you go to Google, type it in, and you can kind of get an idea. If you're doing, thermostats, there's a special HS code for thermostats, for example. And I might know that because we could be manufacturing that type of product, and so you really have to take a look at it. What I would defer to is talk to the factory and ask them to ask their freight forwarder to look up that code and see, what the tax is, if there is any tax behind it.
Mm-hmm. So obviously shipping costs has to factor in, and if you have a really big product, you're going to need a container. Container prices went through the roof, and they're starting to come down now. So of course that changes big time. There's a huge push for USA manufacturing, which is great. And I think that would be a good time to talk about maybe USA molds or USA plastics.
Yeah, absolutely. And you asked me a question and I kind of sidestepped it. I'm hesitant on prices, but I would say it's 5 times more in the United States. And that's on the injection molds. They're typically 5 times more expensive versus China.
You're talking about the molding.
Yeah, the molding itself. The plastic itself is actually pretty competitive. China is still cheaper, but once you get through the tariffs, you really have to evaluate how many units you're going to do in the United States, and you have to evaluate your shipping costs plus tariffs. That has kind of equalized the playing field. But manufacturing in the United States, when it comes to molds, I have found a lot of injection molders are still making their injection mold tooling overseas. It's right. Unbelievable. This last quarter, I visited several injection molding companies, and I asked them, factory to factory, how are you working? What's not working? What are you seeing? And they still said that they're still manufacturing a lot of their molds overseas. They might not tell you that, but do you need to know where your hammer's made for the roofer to be able to put your roof on? It's not always necessary. They just tell you what the price is going to be, and you don't always inspect where those mold or where the tools or the molding is made, right? But manufacturing in America is really coming back.
So, last week I got a phone call about some guy who wanted to make some like little eggshells and plastic eggshells in Florida, and he called and asked about China, and he was worried about getting copied in China. He just had an injection mold, and I was and so what would you say to IP protection in China?
Oh gosh,
for dumb products or plastic products that have nothing.
Yeah. I think you addressed it. Was it earlier this video or last video? But basically, mechanical stuff can be copied extremely easily. Taking a picture, we can open it in Photoshop, we can make it scale, and then we can make that in 3D CAD very easy. I don't even need the product to kind of reverse engineer mechanical stuff. So if it's simply mechanical, the look and feel, we can probably get pretty close. Now, as far as the testing goes and how it fits and how it actually functions, that's a little bit different. And, that might require some fine tuning if a person was going to try to copy it. But inevitably, if it's a dumb item, as we call it, then yeah, they can copy that, or anybody can copy that pretty quickly. And keep one thing in mind. A lot of times, it's not always the factory owner that's copying you. It might be the guy across town who saw your product, who sent your product to the factory in China, who is then copying you. And I've seen that on a couple of different occasions.
Speaking of, I think maybe it'd be a good time to talk about the culture in China and like how the factories work, or what. Like if I want to go visit a factory right now, like what happens?
Okay,
a lot of people want to visit, right? A lot of people want to go see the factory. Like what are they going to see when they go there?
Absolutely. So in all fairness, I have this printed out. This is a copy of our business license. So we do have a company in China that we own. In fact, we have our name on 2 different companies. And so, we actually do represent the China side. And today it's different than it was a couple of years back. And in fact, I have not traveled to China myself in a couple of years. Now, some of our teammates and some of our employees that work for us, they have gone to China. And I know last year when one of our guys went, he had to go to quarantine for a while. But as far as traveling there, I think we cannot travel there right now. I think there are travel restrictions. I would have to Google it. But the Chinese people can go to China, but they're also still under those strict COVID restrictions.
Got it. Okay, let's switch to Vietnam really quick. Injection molding in Vietnam, what do you think?
Absolutely, yes. I kind of explain Vietnam and China in terms of, let's just say, grocery stores. And it's just, bear with me, it's my analogy. Walmart is kind of like that store that pretty much has everything. And I would say Vietnam is kind of that smaller store. Maybe it's your Albertsons, your Safeway, your Kroger, your Publix, something along those lines. They have a lot of the stuff, but Walmart has pretty much everything. And that's kind of the same with China compared to Vietnam. We can manufacture plastic injection molds in China, but some of the materials they might not actually have readily available. Some of your name brand materials might not be readily available in Vietnam. Whereas in China, we can get those name brand materials and they have that supply chain and logistics available for rapid responses. But more or less, I would say a lot of the pricing in Vietnam for injection molding is pretty similar across the board with China. Sometimes China's higher, sometimes Vietnam's higher. Same with the plastics. I'm talking about the injection molds and then the plastic parts themselves. I think where Vietnam really excels right now is the cost of labor is a lot more affordable. And their tariffs kind of don't exist right now. So that's really helpful. And the shipping costs are still pretty elevated right now, too.
Got it. Well, I think that pretty much sums up circuit board assembly, plastic injection molding. The next step would be packaging and assembly. We can lump those together. What do you think? Packaging assembly.
Yes.
So, I mean, I know it's not something we don't really specialize in packaging, but we do it, right? Why do we do it? And what would you say, what's our experience like working with packaging in China and stuff?
We've had pretty good overall experience with packaging. We don't design the graphics. We request the customer to provide the graphics, and we'll typically ask the factory to give us a layout. Here's one takeaway here. Don't try to solve a problem that the factory should be solving. Don't come in there and tell them to use this machine and cut it this way and do it this way. Unless you absolutely require your product to be made that way, the factory is going to come up with a solution for you. And on packaging, if you're trying to get a box that folds inside and folds over this way, listen, unless that's really important, just say, hey, I want a 6-inch by 6-inch by 3-inch box, and it should have a flap that does this. Or you can show them pictures. Pictures speak 1,000 words. And if you have a sample, you can send it to China, and that's probably going to be the best thing. But if you're trying to get batches, keep in mind there is kind of slippage on color. Even though you have a CMYK printed out on the packaging, today you might have a green color that's this. You do a batch of 1,000 units, and then tomorrow you get it made, your next batch, and then the green is just it's off a little bit. It looks close, but you know that it's not the same. So you really have to pay attention to the different batches, and they will actually use a cheaper material. So if you're trying to get corrugated material, they'll use a cheaper material. Maybe you're thinking a shipping box, they make a corrugated box for you, but it's nowhere near the U-line box that you'd buy here in the United States. So you really have to know what you're getting into as far as packaging. If you can call out the weight of the paper, if you can call out the weight of the material, the colors, that's all going to be really helpful to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe in the future we could get somebody local who does packaging on the podcast, talk to them about packaging, and that would be fun, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, like I said, we haven't really done much packaging in the US. I'm sure it's great. Probably the quality, the service is great. Pricing is probably a little bit more, but then maybe the shipping offsets it. So yeah, maybe we could talk about packaging at a later time. And then assembly.
I would like to mention one thing on packaging there, and there are minimum orders for packaging. And it's really difficult because some clients come to us with 1,000-piece orders, and then they want to make this full device or this full box. They want the iPhone box that slides open. And in order to make packaging, the machines, they have to run a high volume of units. And typically the minimum order for boxes is around 2,000 units. So when we have clients that ask for 1,000-piece orders, we still have to place 2,000-piece orders or the minimums with the factory. And sometimes what we do is we actually inventory those items at our own location in China. And then year over year, as the customer keeps coming back, then we have those inventories available. So those minimum orders are really important when it comes to packaging.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing is assembly. How do you feel about assembly? Let's switch it up. Let's say assembly in the US. What do you think about assembly in the US?
I'm doing my golf clap for assembly in the US. Yeah, that's definitely the easiest for us, at least. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, assembly in the US, it's so much easier.
It's easier? Is it faster, slower, more expensive?
Good
obviously?
question. So it's easier for the control purposes, but it's slower because the employees are kind of on their own speed. How do I put this? When you try to take away someone's phone, their cell phone, or you try to limit their kind of interactions with each other.
We have a different culture.
Yes.
Here.
Yeah. In China, we have a little box, a little locker that when the employee walks through the front door, they put the phone in the locker, they lock it, they get a key, and they go sit down, and then they just work all day.
Right.
And they're so focused. They have goals. They have to assemble 10,000 units a day. They're really focused. In the United States, it's a little bit different culture.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just throw a little twist. I know it's funny, but what do you think about T-shirts and hats manufacturing in China?
Facepalm.
A little inside joke. Don't do it. It's a terrible idea. I don't know if Derek wants to talk about that.
Yes, I do. Okay. So, Jay, our very first, we were still working out of the house like 10 years ago, and we decided to order T-shirts, and it wasn't in China. Where was it, Jay?
India.
In India, yes. Mm-hmm. So we ordered T-shirts in India to be manufactured. I don't remember the quantity, but the size large is not a large. The India large is different than the American large. Think about it. So you might specify, the size of the T-shirt, but if you're not giving dimensions, or if you're not specifying the neck, or you're not specifying some of the seams, it can be very challenging. And I remember one time for a customer, this was our second time around, we actually did manufacturing in China. And I thought, listen, we have a team, we know what we're doing, we manufacture all this other stuff. Yeah, customer, we can make T-shirts for you. I learned from my last order that I did in India to check the sizes. Well, this time around, I don't remember, it was 1,000 T-shirts or something for a client. And we got samples. That was easy. The factory will send you samples of the heather gray or whatever the material you're looking for. And then I remember the customer's logo. So I'm a large. The customer wanted their logo right here. Well, what the factory did, this is silk screening. The factory made the same silk screen. They didn't change it for all the different sizes. So if you're an extra small, it's that same silk screen going from armpit to armpit. And if you're like a quadruple XL, that same logo is like super tiny. It's kind of like a Superman logo in the middle of your arm or in the middle of your chest. And it's like, oh my gosh, I thought I could do sourcing. I thought I could manufacture this. And it's just the small things that you miss along the way.
Well, so the key takeaway is stick to what you're good at.
Stick to what you're good at. Yes, I would agree.
And just let someone else do the stuff that you're not good at. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Derek, I'll let you close this time. What do you think?
Okay, I would love to close. And something we didn't mention are factory standoffs. And just keep in mind, when you kind of get into some of these debacles, if you're working with multiple factories, let's say a circuit board factory over here, an injection molding factory here, and an assembly factory here, they're going to all point fingers at each other when something doesn't work. So when you go to put your circuit board inside your plastic box and then put it in your packaging, if it all goes together and it doesn't fit in your packaging, well, the plastic guy is going to point to the packaging factory. The packaging factory is going to point to the plastics guy. And ultimately, there's one answer to this factory standoff. You just sprinkle a little bit of money and the problem goes away. That means that someone's going to be redoing something and they're going to be happy. Another thing to pay close attention to is what I call a ransom. Okay, so I read about this in one of the books, one of the many books I've read. And a ransom is where you give a deposit to a factory. You start doing a little bit of work and you're bought in. And then they come back to you and they say, hey, listen, we're going to need more money at this point in order to continue your project. And there's not much you can do because you've already wired your money to them. You can't get that back and you're stuck and you have to pay them that money. Otherwise, you're not going to get your product. And the question on the ransom is, how many times are they going to ransom you? So just be aware of those two items. We have a lot of experience in manufacturing in China. We have our own facilities in China. So, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We've manufactured millions of different items for clients all around the world. I'm talking the guy next door to tier 1 factories that you're going to see all around the world. So rest assured, we're giving you the best information from the most experience we have.
So if someone wants to reach out to you, how do they reach out?
That's a good question. What do we have set up for reaching out? My email?
Yeah, I think so. Just,
okay,
yeah.
So they have this thing called an email. I just learned about it, but it's my name, Derek, at jayconsystems.com. JAYCONSYSTEMS.com.
Thank you, guys. And mine is jay@jayconsystems.com. And yeah, if you ever have any feedback, comment, you want to talk to me, just send me a message. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Like, subscribe. We do plan on posting these Thursday at 1 p.m. That's our schedule. As long as we're here, we're going to do that. And yeah, leave some suggestions, comments. We want to know what you'd like to hear about, like manufacturing, product design related, or just anything. I mean, if you want us to just talk about anything, we could definitely do that too.
We're very open.
All right. Thanks for watching. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.